So how do you heal the gut? You have to use specific nutrition that's going to heal the gut. You have to use prebiotics as well as probiotics. So most people think, oh, I got a bad gut, so I'm going to take some probiotics. And it just doesn't seem to make my gut better. And understand, this person right here with this gene defect might not have any quote-unquote gut symptoms. So that's the beauty of looking at labs, is that you bypass the person's symptomatology. So they might not have any symptoms, but they still have issues that we need to address. This person with a gene defect like this, how would you treat it? They need to be on some gut nutrition. They need to be on a prebiotic. They need to be educated on what prebiotics are in their normal diet. And they need to be on a probiotic. Possibly doing probiotic enemas, retention enemas as well. We need to heal their microbiota. So there's multiple avenues in this, and we have a bunch of videos on this on our website, because we're doing this with all our patients. The question over there first, does that answer it? Perfect. Yes?
Can you get enough prebiotic fiber from your diet?
Can you get enough prebiotic fiber from your diet? Normally you can. If you're eating good, you're eating some green bananas, you're eating some raw onion family foods, you're eating some raw dandelion leaves, you're eating some chicory substances, things like that. Those are all good prebiotics. If a person has a lot of FUT2 gene defects, I think they should supplement. We use a product that I developed called Sun Spectrum that has a modified guar gum that statistically, from all the research, is the best prebiotic on the market. But again, a prebiotic is simply feeding, helping to feed those epithelial cells. If you continue to have inflammatory processes going on in the gut, like you continue to eat poorly, you continue to eat genetically modified foods and gluten and all these inflammatory things, even though they don't cause any problems, quote unquote, they are. So then it's a losing battle. So you do have to make those changes as well. Yes?
Fermented food prebiotic?
Is a fermented food prebiotic? No. So fermented food has probiotics, but you're going to see in a little bit, if you have specific gene defects, you got to be very careful with those. And if you're going to use a fermented foods are a phenomenal source of probiotics. I always tell my patients that just a couple tablespoons of raw sauerkraut has more probiotics than your entire bottle of probiotics does. However, you have to be careful with fermented foods because they contain a lot of histamine. And if you have ABP1 gene defects that we're going to see in a second, or HNMT gene defects, you can't use fermented foods. Does that help? So this person needs some support of their gut. Still with me? Yes?
Would you use like a flora? Is that the prebiotic?
A flora. Is that the prebiotic? So the flora is the old term that's used, that is now, we call the microbiota. So I don't know what you mean by flora.
Well, I thought I read a long time ago that you should do the flora or the micro one for 2 weeks before you started your probiotics.
So they're probably, she said you should use something for 2 weeks before starting your probiotics. They're probably speaking of a prebiotic. That's probably what they were speaking of.
Do you think that's right to do?
I think you can do it concurrently. I don't think there's a problem with that. So we put people on a product that uses it concurrently. These are your ABP1 genes. The ABP1 genes that affect histamine. So histamine is an inflammatory product that your body normally makes, but it's something it's a chemical that's in a lot of different foods as well. The ABP1 genes are the genes that make the DAO enzyme that breaks down histamine in your gut and partly in your blood. Very, very important gene, because this tells us whether the person can use fermented foods. And by the way, side note on fermented foods, if you have a lot of leaky gut issues, you can't use fermented foods right away either, because they'll cross the gut and The larger molecules will cross the gut border and cause inflammation in the blood and the tissues. So you've got to do some work on healing the gut many times, not all the time, before you can start using fermented foods. So if a person has these gene defects, and this person has double allele defect on one, I would be careful with this person using fermented foods. So your ABP1 genes are really important. As a matter of fact, people with ABP1 gene defects, and then this next family, this HNMT gene defects, this can be the main, this right here, the first part of the report, can be the main cause of the person's symptom problems right here. So HNMT gene, these genes get rid of histamine in the tissue. Now again, you normally produce histamine. Histamine is an immune chemical that's produced in the presence of an antigen or an allergen in your body. And it has a purpose, a very good purpose. But it's supposed to have a very short half-life. Why? Because the HNMT genes are making an enzyme that break it down and get rid of it, so that it's out of your body. It does its job and it's out of your body. Now remember, almost everything that we're going to talk about here, everything in your body is about balance. It's all about balance. There's not necessarily good guys and bad guys, right? The bad guys are only bad guys when they're out of balance. The good guys can be bad guys when they're out of balance. I'm going to take a bunch of antioxidants because I don't want any oxidation in my body. Well, then you're going to die of cancer. Okay? You have to have some oxidants and free radicals in your body because that's what kills pathogens and cancer cells. But when you have too many, they can cause cancer. Follow? It's all about balance. So just when, if I give a patient here, I want you to take 3 of these a day, and they go, well, I'm going to take 10 because that would be better, because we're Americans, that can be bad. So it's all about balance. Yes?
I'm just wondering if you're sure those variants there are truly problematic. In other words, not benign polymorphism.
So good question. Do we know that these variants are truly problematic? Just by looking at the gene profile, we do not. So there's other things that we can look at that I was going to put in the slide presentation too, but I thought I don't want to bore you to death, I would literally kill you. There's some other tests that we can run, an organics test that we can actually look at histamine levels. The only problem with those, the genetic test doesn't change. The organic test changes, rapidly because it's your current snapped photograph of your body chemistry that can be different right now compared to 3 hours from now. So that's the only variant in there.
Just one thought on it. I ran my 23andMe through MTHFRsupport.com, and I thought, oh, I've got G6PD because I've got 2 double mutations. I looked them up, and they're just normal benign polymorphisms that mean nothing, so I don't have G6PD, and I did the quantitative test. But I'm just wondering if you see, these couple things, and you think, oh, it's bad, but it's just a normal polymorphism. Sure, you can do your OAT test to verify, but I'm just wondering if you know for each of those genes if they are benign, silent. So
what he's saying is, when a person has gene defects, does that mean that they're doomed? Does that mean that's causing a symptom pattern in their body?
I'm more asking, let's say you take the top line and there's a defect in there, could it be that doesn't affect the HNMT in any way? Okay, so with
our 20 seconds we have left, remember one thing. That defect in that gene does not mean that that gene is not working completely. And we don't even know that just because there's research on the MTHFR 677 gene that we'll talk about later, that a double allele defect decreases its function by 65%. That's on average. And even at that, it's still working. So it doesn't mean you're doomed to that disease or you're doomed to a problem with that. It just means that we do have compromise in there, especially with a greater amount of defects in a family. That's all we can really say. So the environment trumps everything. So if your environment is good, then you're going to have less problems with that gene profile. Now, again, if a person's coming to me, typically they have symptoms. So then we want to clarify their genetics with their symptoms and really get a better picture on what we want to support. Does that help? So there's no guarantee that just because I have defects that I'm going to absolutely have problems, but there's also no guarantee if I have 0 defects that I'm not going to have a whole host of problems. Because just because I don't, let's say this person is actually really, really good, actually, in their HNMT, but I have had people with single and double allele defects on almost every one of those. The chance of that person having histamine clearing problems is like through the roof. Does that make sense? So you want to address it.